It is my hope that this interactive meeting between the Bulawayo business community and the EU delegation will avail to our captains of industries the trade opportunities available within the EU in light of the Economic Partnership Agreement EPA between the EU and Zimbabwe. With these few remarks, may I take this opportunity to thank the EU for supporting the Bulawayo Labour Cluster, which we visited this afternoon. The project received funding and equipment from the EU through the COMESA Adjustment Facility. With this equipment and with the support of the Minister of Women's Affairs, Community, Small and Medium Enterprises Development, the Bulawayo Leather Cluster has managed to set up a leather shoe manufacturing factory which is run on a cooperative basis. The leather cluster has expanded its wings beyond the borders to supply school shoes among a host of other local partnerships. My office remains open to your ideas and propositions that can contribute to the development of Bulawayo province. As Bulawayo, we are on the starting line, and by virtue of this interactive meeting with the EU Head of Delegation to Zimbabwe, His Excellency Timo Olkkonen, we take it as cheering us up to go for gold. I wish you fruitful engagements during this interactive meeting. I thank you.
Indeed, I was hoping for a meeting with the private sector representatives on my trip now to Bulawayo, because I'm conscious that that you, private sector representatives, are a segment of society that we from the EU side don't interact very much with, and I think I should do more in reaching out to you. I think one of the reasons for that is that EU is not, as an institution, is not there in order to promote business directly. Our member states, the European Union member states, have of course their own companies and private enterprises whose interests they want to promote and with whom they want to establish linkages, in respective countries, such as my EU ambassador colleagues here in Zimbabwe representing their national enterprises. But also within the EU institutions, we have very much the philosophy that we want to promote economic growth and jobs creation. And of course, it's only the private sector that can, sustainably generate that growth and create those jobs. Public sector doesn't exist in a vacuum. The tax money to provide all the services have to come from somewhere. It's the private sector that ultimately is there to provide those opportunities for citizens. And that's why we have had this philosophy of promoting jobs and growth. And I think now, when we have a new European Commission that just came into place in last December, which is now starting to get their act together and is setting our priorities, I'm confident that idea of reaching out to the private sector and engaging, how can we support growth, economic growth through private sector cooperation, will be a strong element in the job description of the European Union, also in our external relationship with our partners. We are, from the EU side, entering a new multi-annual financial cycle. The EU has a multi-annual budget. Our development cooperation, as part of that overall budget, has a multi-annual cycle. We are just coming to the end from the term 2014 to 2020. And that means that currently in Brussels they are negotiating the overall budget. A part of that will be, of course, our development cooperation with our external partners. And a part of that will be how much funding will be allocated and where. Which instruments will we be using within that allocation. And thirdly, also then, what sectors will we be promoting in different regions and countries. This is a discussion that we are now starting in Zimbabwe, and I would like to use this also as an opportunity to consult here with the Bulawayo business community, how you also perceive how can EU be helpful in promoting private sector and through that economic growth and job creation. Taking into account that, of course, there's a big number of limitations about what is possible and what is not in that in terms of respect. This is not a promise that private sector cooperation will be a part of our forthcoming priorities, but it's something that we need to consult, discuss with Brussels and also with the Zimbabwe government. But for the moment, everything is on the table, and we will be very happy to discuss that. Furthermore, I would be most interested, if you have considerations or ideas or perceptions, what are the challenges that you have in this, the current environment, and if there's any policy-related issues that you would want to take up in our discussions. We have much more contacts with, or at least I personally have much more contacts with would-be European investors, would-be European businesses that would want to make trade here. But I have to say that I probably have a lot to learn from Zimbabwean domestic businesses in this regard. Finally, my last word is that indeed Zimbabwe and EU have a free trade agreement. Zimbabwe is party to the economic Eastern and Southern African Economic Partnership Agreement group, as the Honourable Minister referred to. Within that treaty, that agreement, Zimbabwean produce has a duty and quota-free access to the European markets. We think this carries a lot of potential with it. Unfortunately, the trade with the EU forms only 5% of the overall trade that Zimbabwe has with foreign countries. I think there's a lot of scope to expand on that, and whatever obstacles might be on the way for that would be an interesting point to address. Obviously, for small and medium-sized enterprises, a jump into the EU markets directly might be a bridge too far. That there's of course local markets and regional markets, but ultimately, at least from our side, from the EU side, we would want to see much more trade going both ways, EU-Zimbabwe. Currently, negotiations have started on expanding that agreement also to cover areas such as services. And I think if you have a message to the Zimbabwean government about what such an agreement, an expanded agreement should look like, I think you should take also the opportunity of taking those kind of points up, when you have your own consultative processes. So I was not going to say much, but in fact I used already quite a few minutes, when in fact I want to hear from you. Indeed, so thank you very much. Also thank you very much for Trade Fair for organizing this forum. We are looking at, with my EU colleagues, European Member States colleagues, to perhaps make a group visit during the Trade Fair here, and perhaps have something similar, with a wider group, and those member states that then also have, are also more directly representing their respective companies from their respective countries. So thank you very much. Siyabonga.
Definitely, the value sector is so critical for our industry. But just one thing I wanted to point out and check with His Excellency. The revival of this particular sector involves a lot of training. We have had a gap which we've missed a lot in terms of modern technologies that have happened in industry. We need to close that gap as far as the training is concerned. You saw today with those flip charts. I'm sure there's much more that can be done in terms of training with modern techniques. But above that, we do have our Leather Institute of Zimbabwe. That is not functioning. And that used to be the core, the center of training for all these activities around the beef and leather value chain. I wish His Excellency would look into that and see how they can support the training institution of leather in Zimbabwe.
EU has disappointed us for the past 20 years. Oriented in EU equipment. I think the whole country was running on EU equipment for years, and for the past 20 years we've been begging just to get alternative equipment. And those alternatives have disappointed us. I think Minister will confirm here, our health sector is in a terrible situation. Sometimes because of the equipment we have. As I speak, we are still doing open surgery. We will be doing minimally invasive surgery. And all that is because we have no access to equipment. EU is the best. If you're oriented to use Carlstor's Techno or Escula, those are these examples, you find that the alternative equipment has been disappointing us. Attempts have been made, several attempts. I wish there were doctors here that would confirm what they've gone through or what they go through. And because there are no credit lines from EU, it's very difficult to get that equipment from EU. And also because there are no maybe government-to-government support like you would get maybe government of Zimbabwe with the Far East, and then we get equipment, unfortunately, disappoints us. Not that they can't do the right one, but maybe because we take time to get to know which one works and which one doesn't work. So my wish is that EU can open credit lines, private sector is that deal with medical equipment, that something can be done along those lines.
Yes, earlier when we rewind back to early 2000 and so, our trade relations were premised on the Cotonou Agreement, and there are separate annexes which were quite lengthy, and there were all these regulations that regulated the EU trade with African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, and Zimbabwe being one of them. And there were a lot of preferential arrangements. Now, I'm not sure if beef was one of them, but there was a lot of. There was the sugar protocol, etc., and I'm sure many of you know about this. And then, of course, this arrangement, this preferential arrangement that the EU had with African, Caribbean, and Pacific states was challenged in the WTO, said it was discriminatory, and that's why we needed to go into negotiations to have these economic partnership agreements with African countries, Pacific countries, and Caribbean countries, particularly those that could not benefit from unilateral preferences, i.e. those countries that were classified as least developed countries, because the WTO gave exceptions to those. So that's just the background that I know about, about what has been the background. And there's a lot of misconceptions about, why did our trade relations change, that it was political, EU wanted to use trade as a weapon, but that's not the case. It was about this WTO compatibility requirements, and then hence then the negotiation for the EPA, which Zimbabwe, by the way, was the first African country to ratify with the EU. So beef. So indeed, there's EU has this duty and quota-free access to Zimbabwean produce to the markets. But of course, agricultural products, and particularly meat, then have further, if you would say, conditions. There's phytosanitary requirements that are quite important in the EU context that our consumers are quite considerate about. And if we're talking, for example, about the US, we have a lot of discussion about this chlorinated chicken that we are now concerned that the British consumers will have to take since they are exiting the Union. From the US, and we are very conscious about the health requirements, and that I know that this is one of the hurdles that Zimbabwe now have about those standards, because there was problems with the cold storage chain and these kind of issues and disease control. which I know that are some of the issues that are not only towards the EU but also within the regional trade are making creating obstacles for Zimbabwean exports. Now, what we are doing here is that we just launched last year the Zimbabwe Agricultural Growth Program, ZAGP. And that program is particularly looking at the livestock sector and creating the idea of creating value chains within the livestock sector. And so we are looking also at the phytosanitary standards and how we could support Zimbabwe in addressing those issues in order to bring into more light into the livestock value chains. It's not only meat production, we are looking at dairy, we are looking at poultry, so there's a program for that, and I hope that in the medium term it will also produce results and will be. So that's something that is happening there. So in terms of trade instruments, there's nothing hindering Zimbabwean beef exports to Europe, but there might be other issues that need to be tackled, and those are probably also linked, why Zimbabwean exports might not reach other destinations. On leather, I think there's probably, then you wouldn't have these phytosanitary questions, but the question is probably about competitiveness in general. I know the success story of Ethiopia in the leather sector and in garments also, that they have to make significant strides, and maybe that's an example that might be looked at, what did they do right in order to get really their exports going, and I think maybe there's something because ultimately it's about competitiveness. If the European importer gets the same quality produce from somewhere else at at a lower price, then why take it from somewhere else? So I think that those are issues. But that said, I'm not an expert in these areas, so there's clearly something that I think the southern region and Ndebele and Bulawayo has clearly have advantages because of the vibrant, or because of the cattle rearing areas and then the tradition that there is there. So certainly I think I see opportunities there, like we witnessed also today. Yes, clothing sector. I think that boils down to competitiveness as well. I would assume, of course, I think industries the world over, including Europe, they took a huge blow with the inexpensive imports from East Asia and Southern Asia. So there's like a lot of that clothing sector never recovered also in Europe from that competition. And I think the competition is very much still there. And how to compete with that at a global level, that's probably quite a, that's an important question. Beef, training, I take that point, we'll make a note of that one of the asks that came in is about, training issues, vocational training, business-related training, leather sector related, so that's, I think it's quite important. Medical equipment, your question makes me at the same time in a weird way happy, because I see that the European products were very good, but then it was difficult to replace them, but at the same time sad, of course, because of all the challenges that you are facing with not having that equipment available. Well, there's nothing hindering those imports from Europe as such. It's a question of finding the funding in order to make those importations. And there's, in principle, nothing as a hindrance for private sector lending. On the public sector, yes, we have obstacles because of the debt arrears that Zimbabwe owes to multilateral financial institutions, and also then to European member states on the bilateral level. But on the private sector lending, there's nothing in principle, hindering, lending. And the European Investment Bank, in fact, comes from time to Zimbabwe to look at opportunities. And they've been negotiating with private banks in Zimbabwe in offering credit lines to small and medium-sized enterprises for investments, for productive investments. Of course, whatever lending happens must be viable. There has to be, the payback options and so. But I think they are relatively positive that something might be happening in the near future. One of the problems obviously has been the issues around that the banking sector itself is not operating as it is in many other countries, and that's creating problems of forward lending. But EIB is interested, and I'm hoping that they will indeed be successful in providing some of the credit lines. The exact conditions and which banks I can't yet say, but I hope that will come clear in the near future.